So, as some of you know, this week will be the last week where there is satsang 5 days a week. And next week there will be satsang on Wednesday evening and Saturday evening. So today I'll start off like I often do, which is to put the talks into context. And there's a reason why I say this. It isn't just part of, filling in the hour or hour and a half. There's good reason for pointing out that the talks are about happiness in daily living. So that really means that the problem that we're looking at, the problem that is being solved or being considered, is the problem of happiness for the human being in daily living and unhappiness for the human being in daily living. So that's what it means when I say that the topic of the talks is something very specific. It's really to put everything in context to that subject, the subject of happiness in daily living. Now, when it comes to spiritual seeking, for good reason, but it's also good for us to see that this is the case. Sometimes we think spiritual seeking is about truth or understanding what is fundamental, understanding how life works, which sort of implies understanding the workings of the universe. And there's reason for that being introduced as in some teachings or some phases of seeking as what it's all about. What it does is it moves focus from one thing to another, and in a way, by doing that, it creates a juxtaposition. It creates a contrast between that which is described as truth or reality and that which is described as ignorance or illusion or the unreal. So by saying it's all about the real, it's all about truth, by default there is a defining of what the truth is, let's say. So the teachings will have statements about truth, for example, that which doesn't change, that which is not relative, that the absolute, what we are. So what we are is defined as truth. Now these are all concepts, all teachings, everything that's been said in life is a concept. Anything that's ever been written down is a concept, no matter how spiritual it sounds, like you are the Son of God, or what you are is awareness, formless awareness or consciousness. All of these things can sound like absolute statements of fact and truth. In reality, when we look at them objectively, we find that they are concepts, and every concept has an equal and opposite concept. So if someone says God is real, someone else can say God doesn't exist. So there is always an opposite concept to any concept. What you are is absolute. It's a concept. Someone else can say what you are is relative. It's important for us to understand concepts because it starts to create distinctions between layers or levels that often get bonded together. And when things get bonded together, nuances that would exist, that we would be conscious of when there is a recognition of two different layers, get lost. Those nuances get lost when, let's say, two layers are seen as one layer. So one of the nuances that I'm speaking about here is the concept of something, the idea about it. It's a set of words which are really a set of thoughts put together in a cohesive manner to create a sentence. that describes something. There is the description, the belief, the thought, the opinion, and then there is the thing itself. And we often mistake the concept, the thought about something, as being the same as the thing. And so when we hear someone's concept, we think they're telling us about the thing. Now, this may seem like a subtle and unimportant thing. It's hugely important, actually, because this bonding together and making concepts and the thing itself is what happens in our own thinking. And that movement, when it happens, means that our thoughts about something, about life, about any of the things that are happening in life, are not seen as interpretations or separate from the thing itself. When that happens, when we assume that our thoughts about something are absolute, which is what has happened in the process of our development, because we have come to know ourselves as a psychological identity, which really means a thought-based identity, and because when we know ourselves as anything, we assume it is true, it is real, we've come to know thoughts as true and real. Because how we know ourselves is as a psychological identity, without us even realizing that we know ourselves as a psychological identity. That's the sense of self that we have, which is an identity based on ideas, opinions, labels of ourselves. We've been pigeonholed by society, by ourself, by our experiences, by our conditioning. And so we know ourselves in a very narrow way, thinking that that is how we always were and how we always will be. So in each moment when we know ourselves a particular way, it means because we've conceptualized, this is who I am. So we know ourselves as a psychological or thought-based entity without realizing that that's how we know ourselves. And because whenever there is a sense of self, it's assumed to and felt to be real, then that means that any thinking is sensed to be real. And real means unchanging. Real means not at a distance. Real means the thing itself and absolute. So essentially what's happened inside of our system is that our thoughts are seen to be absolute, and thoughts are extremely relative. Relative is the opposite of absolute. And yet, our relationship to thoughts is that they are absolute. So what happens is when we mistake something that is relative as being absolute, something that is actually more absolute or more unchanging fails to be seen. So there is essentially an identification with the relative functions of the human being. In this case, we're talking about thinking. And it's not seen, it's not appreciated that thoughts are relative. And if this gets seen, it's a game changer. So that means our interpretation of life is always a concept, is always relative. And there are two things. There's life and then our interpretation of it. And the interpretation that there's interpretations of life on different levels or different functions. So let's look at just the thinking. If we start to see our thinking is a story about what is, then we're separating what is and our story about what is. And our story about what is colored by our sense of self. And the truth is that our sense of self is quite misguided, as it tends to be developed by the process of growing in life. A very conditioned sense of self gets formed, a sense of self that is prone to interpreting life through a very narrow lens. And yet, when life is interpreted through that narrow lens, what is felt is felt as if it is accurate and real. So, in other words, it is not apparent that we are interpreting life through a very narrow lens. So if we can come to see that our interpretation of life is often very narrow-minded, colored by factors that we weren't in control of. So essentially we have a lens on that produces a certain output. And when that output is an output of uncomfortableness, an output of resistance, an output of complaining or regret or expectation, essentially uncomfortableness is the more general term that we can use. If we can understand that our true nature doesn't experience life that way, it's our thinking that experiences life that way. So with the notion that thinking is very relative, it's not seen as relative to start off with. We might get given the hint that says our true nature doesn't feel uncomfortable. Only our false sense of self that sees life through a certain filter, a filter of uncomfortableness, feels uncomfortable. And that is very relative. That is an interpretation of what is, that is off the mark. And hopefully we also have introduced idea about the fact that there is what is, and then a projected story that includes in it what is and what it means to me. So as we use these hints, we may start to see a layer of our experience of life, which is this layer of thinking, and start to see it as not the same as the situation itself, not the same thing as life. And this is what is referred to as identification with the body, identification with thoughts, identification with circumstance. So essentially this sense of self, which is a thought-based sense of self, is when it's not seen as a layer, then it is experienced as being life itself, which means effectively the sense of self and life have become bonded together as one thing, which is why it's called identification. Now, it isn't really that the sense of self has bonded to life itself, but rather the interpretation of life, which is a thought-based movement, which is felt not necessarily or as thought, but is felt as the complexity of human experience, emotions and feelings. That is covering up an appreciation of life that just is. So when we hear about there is no such thing as good or bad, what that's talking about is that life itself, from a perspective of one that is seeing the unfolding of life as a mix of interconnected opposites, meaning life will be both positive and negative, and both positive and negative make up the whole. Then, when we're looking at life, the label of positive and negative cease to exist as distinctly as they do when we are wanting one and rejecting the other. Because when we want one and reject the other, essentially we say life should be one and not the other. And that is a underappreciation or misinterpretation of the whole. The whole is the whole. And when the whole is looked at from the whole, it isn't about insisting on only one half of the whole. The psychological me, on the other hand, doesn't know how to look at the whole as the whole, because the psychological me is defined by things it likes and feels threatened by things it doesn't like. The psychological me is convinced that it is added to when life delivers things it likes, and it is attacked or subtracted from when life delivers things it doesn't like. So it simply can't be at peace, and it simply can't accept. It simply can't see life as a whole, because that way of seeing life is a challenge, is a threat to its sense of existence. Now, the good news is that psychological me is not what we really are. What we really are is not challenged by life being a mix of interconnected opposites. Interconnected opposites means duality. So the yin-yang symbol is an example of the interconnected opposites that make up the whole. So the black and white, male and female, are the two interconnected opposites, the duality. But they don't exist separate from each other. They exist together, making up the whole. And what we really are is not challenged by life being what it is, a set of interconnected opposites. The psychological me looks at the yin-yang and says, oh, white is an addition to what I am and black is a challenge to what I am. So it simply can't accept the interconnected oppositeness of life. It is in resistance to that all the time. So that's the really good news, is that our true nature is not affected by the interconnected oppositeness of life, the duality of life. The psychological me is, and that psychological me is active whenever there is this projecting or interpreting life through the thinking mind, through thoughts, which is why it's so important for us to hear about the fact that we are continually judging, labeling, commenting on what is happening, on whether it is good enough, not good enough, whether it should be this way, shouldn't be that way, whether we should have acted that way or we shouldn't have, what will happen in the future. All of that commentary is not being with what is. And it's only once we see this layer of thinking and register it, so awareness becomes aware of the fact that there is a commentary about what is. Can there be maybe a dropping out of that for a moment? And in the dropping out of the commentary, we fall into what is referred to the gap in between the thoughts. So when we hear this, look for the gap in between the thoughts, it's really trying to highlight the fact that there is this incessant thinking that covers up what is, which is our interpretation of the world. And I'll repeat it again, we have no idea, generally speaking, that our interpretation of what is not what is. So living in the head is, this is what it's referring to, is when we live in the head, it means that we haven't recognized, we haven't been given a glimpse that there is another way of experiencing life. So dropping into the heart is the imagery or the terminology used for the dropping out of our interpretation of what is. And maybe for the first time, realizing the silence and the oneness with what is when the psychological me stops. And this is, in a way, a significant part of meditation. Now, I won't say this is meditation per se, because sometimes we might sit for meditation and a dropping into the heart or dropping into silence doesn't happen. Whereas I say it's a significant component of meditation is that when that does happen, then we get to experience meditation free of the psychological self. We get to experience a real being with what is, allowing of what is. And that tends to require us to have a glimpse of the fact that even when we're not commenting on life, life exists. And that might sound obvious, but in experience, because we've only ever known life and our thought-based interpretation of it, which may be very subconscious. I'm not talking about necessarily thoughts that we will see as thoughts about what is, but rather a arising sense of the present moment, which isn't really the present moment. It's our sense of life as it's being interpreted by our thinking. And because we've only known that experience of life, then the other isn't available, isn't known to be available, until one day it just becomes obvious that even when there isn't a commentary about good or bad, right or wrong, this should or this shouldn't be, in that moment, when there's a stillness, we realize, oh, so life still will be, even if I'm not labeling it. So if we go back to, this is a talk about human happiness. And so it makes our job much easier than if this was about understanding the fundamental essence of life, for example. Like if we had to come up with a theory of everything, like scientists and physicists are hoping, they're always trying to come up with calculations or computations that hold everything and explain everything. If that was our job, it'd be a tough job. This is a very simple job. This is about human happiness. So it simply means looking at what human unhappiness is. And human unhappiness arises in the form of essentially resistance, an attitudinal resistance, which means a commentary, an attitudinal commentary that extends horizontally in time about what has happened or what might happen or what is happening. So the problem is human unhappiness. And so we need to just observe our own human unhappiness. It's available for us to observe throughout our day. And so when we can say, I'm not happy in this moment, then we just need to see, okay, what's going on? And we'll find that there is a circumstance. The circumstance is either pleasurable or painful, according to our biological preferences. And on top of feeling the pleasure or pain of the biological reaction, on top of that, which is inevitable, then there is usually another commentary that is saying something about the pleasure and pain. And that additional commentary creates a sense of uncomfortableness. And so if we see this commentary and remember that actually life is, and maybe find this place to drop into, which, and I suggest bringing attention to the physical experience, the sight and the sounds in particular, and just bring your attention to the fact that there is all of the visuals exactly the way they are. And that may have the effect of bringing you into the present moment, where the story about what has happened for a moment drops away. And you can pick it up again. You will pick it up again. It will get, drawn back into that movement. And just for a moment, there is the space in between the commentary. So you've dropped into the present moment. And there's no problem in that moment. So that means our attachment to what has happened, which really means our psychological insistence that life should only be pleasure, 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 and something happened that wasn't pleasure. And so we're basically saying it shouldn't have been like that. It needed to be pleasure, pleasure, pleasure. In that moment, that attachment has fallen away. So involvement in what has happened falls away, and there's peace. Now, that falling away will happen or it won't happen according to destiny, we could say, in that moment. Really, destiny means a set of movements that's outside of our control. So thoughts arise or don't arise, or thoughts stop or don't stop, not because we make them stop or start, but because of the complexity of the human instrument in that moment and the circumstance we find ourselves in. So if the notion is set up that, I'm seeking peace of mind, which is the form in which human happiness is available, and my involvement in what has happened is the absence of peace of mind. It is the suffering, which when suffering falls away, we find as peace of mind. So if we recognize that, and then we insist that involvement in circumstance doesn't happen, we may be setting up a new problem. Because as I've just mentioned, involvement or the absence of involvement is not really in our control. It's dependent on the biological instrument in that moment. And so we might realize that an insistence on involvement in circumstance not happening may cause a problem when it inevitably happens from time to time. The insistence that it doesn't is involvement in the involvement. So that's a secondary layer of suffering. So first we're involved in the situation. This shouldn't have happened that way. And then we say, but my peace of mind is disturbed when I'm involved in the situation, so let me stop And let's say the stopping doesn't happen, because as I said, that's that movement of thought is a result of our makeup, which we're not in control of. And so if that involvement happens and then we say this shouldn't be happening, now we're involved in the involvement. And so if we recognize that, maybe the involvement in the involvement falls away in that moment. Because there's a recognition, oh, involvement is happening. What to do? I can either resist it, which is another layer of involvement on top of the primary involvement, or the movement of not resisting it might happen, which is simply, once again, destiny unfolding. So all of these descriptions are not intended as prescriptions for someone to make happen, but rather they are descriptions of what might happen. So you might find the situation I described happens, the involvement in the involvement might happen, and then the thought says, resisting the primary involvement is just more suffering. Stop. And a stopping might happen. So the descriptions here are not a prescription that you need to make happen, but rather a description of a sequence of events and thoughts and recognitions of involvement, etc., and a falling away of one or both of the layers of involvement. So the primary involvement is your attitude towards the circumstance, and the secondary involvement is your attitude towards the attitude, which is the attitude towards the circumstance. Some teachings would say, circumstance is not in your control, but your attitude towards the circumstance is something you can affect. And the reason that that's said is because it then creates a movement that from time to time seems like, oh yes, I am changing my attitude. In those moments when the attitude of involvement falls away, it seems like I made it fall away, because the thought would arise that says, getting involved is futile. And so from a more purist point of view, we'd say, well, even that thought that involvement is futile arises, and the thought arises, and that wasn't my doing. But for a while, what's important is for us to see that there is the circumstance and then an attitude to it. And so in order to see that initial difference, a teaching will say you can affect your attitude. Then further down the track, the teaching will say even your attitude is not in your control. And that comes in after the teaching has introduced the concept of the difference between circumstance and then your attitude to circumstance. So we'll take a couple of questions. Hi, Sean.
Great satsang.
Thank you.
I've never heard you speak like this before, and from the get-go, it just resonated with me so much. But I'm going to have to watch this again because I'm kind of a little bit confused. I For the longest time I was like depressed, but then I found that place of dropping out of my the psychological head and into the like deep hole of peace. That's what it feels like.
Mm-hmm.
But also the mechanics of my body, I can now see. Like I can see I am not the doer, but if I my if I feel like I'm getting involved in something, I can see it and I know how my body's going to work. So it feels like I don't resist it, and it feels like I can control my attitude. That's what I was confused about, because that's the one thing that I thought I could do. But in the end of the day, like when I even out of meditation, there's a feeling of expanded awareness,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know. It's like it's kind of like cognitive dissonance I've got, you know, because I've got these thoughts coming in, and I can see them, like, feels like I can see them as they're coming in. So it feels like it's like a paradigm shift, you know?
Mm-hmm.
It's like before I felt like life was happening to me. Now I feel like life is happening through me,
Mm-hmm.
and I can see what's happening as it's happening.
Mm-hmm.
So is that right?
That's excellent. Yes.
Is that okay? Good.
It feels
Yeah,
it feels different as well,
really
right?
good satsang. I mean, sorry.
It feels different on your side. Like the two feel very different, right? One is much more freeing than the other.
Oh, yeah, completely. It's as I say, it's like a paradigm shift. Really is.
Mm-hmm.
It's a shift in seeing life. You know, it's seeing it. It's kind of like I never thought. Oh, I'm just overwhelmed by it a little bit. But yeah, I'm gonna have to watch this back again.
It's very
You
good to
know,
very
I
good.
do have. Sorry, on you
Well, I was going to say it's very good to hear that. That's very great that that's happening. As far as your attitude goes, what I would say is that a change in attitude can happen, right, in any moment. That's so. The concept has come in that says it's all about your attitude, and then you see how you might have an attitude of being of blame, for example, and then the attitude of blame gets cut off, and you're saying, but well, I'm in control of my attitude, and it's being cut off. And what I'm saying is, yes, a change of attitude can and does happen. But even that change in attitude can be viewed from that paradigm shift you're talking about, which is, even that is just happening. So
Yes, but that feels like the absolute.
yeah.
That feels like, yeah.
Well, it's you see, the thing is that it doesn't even need to be um, an experience. Like, so if often we're wanting an experience of seeing everything as a happening, including a change in attitude.
Yeah.
And if we're experientially wanting to see the change in attitude as a happening, then experientially we sort of feel very disconnected from being the person, very disconnected from being the human.
That's exactly, yeah.
Yeah. And that's reasonable for a period of time, but after a while, it becomes apparent that that's probably not integrated living, right? So we do need to come back into sort of being more connected to the body and being the person. And then experientially, it feels like I'm, I'm doing certain things. However, deep down, it's known that, but even those things that feel like they're my doing, they're a happening because of the complexity of the system, the body with its all
That's what I was trying to say. I am aware of what's happening as it's happening, and it's almost like I know this sounds a bit crazy, but I'm aware of my genetic makeup now, and it's almost like I can see it happening while it's happening. So it kind of feels like I'm controlling it, but I'm not. You know?
yeah, yeah.
It's a little confusing.
Yeah. So even if when you've become
yeah,
you've become aware of your particular makeup, so you know you're going to get frustrated, let's say, with something because that's just the way you are. And so you know when the frustration arises, you know it's not your doing because that's a result of your genetic makeup, right? And so even though it feels like you're the one getting frustrated, you know that that is a happening according to your genetic structure. And in the same way, even your the thought, let me change my attitude, or maybe I can just, blaming is pointless. That thought, even that thought, is a result of your genetic, genetics. Not in the same way as you're looking at the genetics as, you might lose focus from time to time, and you say, oh well, that just happened because it's my genetics. But even the more fundamental process of just a thought arising, if you look at that as your genetics as well, a thought
yes,
is your genetics.
yes.
So then you can see,
That.
even the change of
Sorry.
attitude. Go on.
No, so I'm just saying, it's even deep. It's deeper than that. You see, it's even like the thought that comes in. I can be like, just now is a very challenging time for me. I won't go into the personal story, but I was speaking with my brother, and I could see my words were. I could see me speaking, and then I was able to. Well, it feels like I was able to cut it off, but it's just an awareness now that certain behaviors, old behaviors, are coming to the surface, and they're getting cut off.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right?
Yeah, but so even the cutting off is the equivalent of an old behavior. It is it's not an old behavior, but the cutting off is a behavior too, let's say, a functioning. So the thing is, there is no one doing anything. There is the body functioning. Right? So even the cutting off is a body function.
Yeah, the body function, that's what I'm saying. But at the end of the day, it feels like I thought, like, I remember you saying, and you said you were laughing. You're saying, I thought I was consciousness once. Well, that's kind of what I feel like. I feel like the whole awareness with my body in it.
Mm-hmm.
It feels more. Sorry, go on.
Enjoy it.
No, it's great. It's great. But yeah, I was just checking in with you because I just found this satsang so intimate, actually, so great. So yeah, thank you very much, Roger.
You're welcome, Sean. Nice to hear from you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Hi, Holger.
Thank you, Roger.
You're welcome.
I just wanted to express my gratitude and what a gift your satsangs are.
Thank you.
In its simplicity and clarity. I mean, this is so amazing. Because my whole life, assuming I had a life, I always called this commentary me, and this is so amazing.
Mm.
How trapped, what a trap in, I don't have words for this, just gratitude, and there sometimes fear comes up in the system, but this is seen, and then in the beginning of the satsang, I felt very tired. I even didn't want to, just wanted to lie down on the sofa, but I kind of forced myself to sit in front of the computer, and it was really good. So there is a sense of doership, like I didn't follow my habit of just lying down. And anyway, just wanted to share this. Maybe you have an idea about this.
Yes, I want to say something about where you say there is a sense of doership, right? Because what's happening is, in this context, there's a mixing up of effort with doership, and effort doesn't mean doership. So if I decide to go for a 12-kilometer run, or if I decide to climb up a mountain one morning, that doesn't imply doership. Doership is the attitude that says, oh, I decided to go for a run, and I was the one that made myself finish. Whereas the doership is there if we believe I decided to go for a run and I made myself, finish and get up at a certain period of time. And it's the attitude of non-doership when I feel, yes, I'm going to go for a run, and maybe I might not even really feel like it, but the thought says, come on, you do it, and it will feel good when you've done it. And all of that happens, and my attitude is, all of those movements that got me to run or didn't get me to run, whatever the case may be. So whatever happens in life, I see none of that was my doing. It was all a happening. So it was destined for the alarm to go off. It was destined for me to register that the alarm was going off. It was destined for me to have a thought that says, oh, I really don't feel like going for a run. And then it was destined for another thought to arise that says, go on, do it, you'll feel good. And then it was destined for the body to have the physical movement of getting out of the bed. And so the same with you getting in front of the computer. It was destined for there to be the feeling of tiredness. and it was destined for there to be the thought that says, no, push through the tiredness. You know, there's something interesting here. And so the attitude of non-doership simply sees all of that as a happening, or as destiny unfolding, as not your doing, but rather what happened. And so that means that there could be great effort or great activity, and still the attitude of non-doership can coexist with pushing yourself.
There was always so much effort in me.
Mm-hmm.
The commentary to survive my ideas and to resist and to there was lots of pain in the body physically, and so there was lots of effort. And yeah, thank you for your pointer. I just have to maybe digest it.
Mm.
And otherwise, it's just so beautiful to see you and to listen to you. And I love your, you have such beautiful concepts, like little pieces of art.
Well, they're Ramesh's by and large.
Yeah, but they belong to life. I mean, it's just not even Ramesh. It's just life itself, discovering itself.
Yes.
I just thank you for your generosity and your patience and to your creativity in always finding a different angle to make it more clear.
Thank you, Holger. So who in the past, what did you say? You put a lot of effort, like from shoulds and shouldn'ts, I guess. Who did that?
It just happened.
Exactly. So, you know, there never was a doer, even when the belief in doership was there. There really wasn't a doer. There was the belief in doership, which was contained in the thoughts that were just happening. So there never has been someone that is the doer. There were just thoughts arising that created the impression of a doer. So even in the past, when you were, struggling and feeling much more restricted and limited, even that definitely wasn't your doing. You know, that was destiny unfolding in that way. Hi, Martin. Hi, Martin.
Hi there. Well, I like I think was it Scott who asked the first questions.
Sean.
Sorry?
It was Sean.
Oh, Sean. Yes. So, look, he said he's never heard you talk like this before, and neither have I.
Okay.
And I've got into a sort of a kind of an overload here. I had so many questions for you as you were speaking, and now you've said, Martin, I can't think of which question to ask.
Uh-huh.
But I was talking to somebody yesterday, no, the day before yesterday, who I called my teacher at one time.
Mm-hmm.
And we were having. It's funny that sometimes when he came through on Skype, and my first impression was that he was very grumpy.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, "Are you okay?" And he said, "Well, why do you?" "Yes, I'm okay. Why?" And I said, "Well, you seem really rather, if you don't mind me saying it, grumpy." And he said, "I'm just being businesslike." And I said, oh, fine, okay then. And we started talking. And I started talking to him about, he once said to me that, do you know what? One day you're going to be glad that all this has happened.
Mm-hmm.
I said to him, you know, one day you said, I'd be glad all this had happened. Mm-hmm. Well, actually, it's not quite like that. I just know now that all this was always going to happen.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And, you know, life is just an unfolding. It's destiny. You know, my dad was going to die when he died. My twin brother was going to die when he died. My wife was going to say, I want to split when she said she wanted to split. Mm-hmm. All of these things are out of my control. And it was just due to my genetic makeup and up-to-date conditioning. And I talked to him about you, and he said, oh, you know, don't talk about that. And he was really dismissive of everything. Mm-hmm. And at one point I said, well, you know, one of the elements of the teaching is that we all act from our genetic makeup and our up-to-date conditioning. And he said, your problem is that you're addicted to thinking. Mm-hmm. And I said, well, thanks for that concept. But so what do you say? Addicted to thinking? What does that? He said, well, you just got to stop thinking. And I said, well, as far as I'm concerned now, my understanding is saying you've got to stop thinking. It's just like saying stop being hungry, or stop wanting sex, or stop enjoying the sunshine. You know,
mm-hmm.
It's not helpful for you to say that. And then he said something like, well, you know, you've never experienced the things I have because I was a Zen monk for 7 years. And I said, well, yeah, well, that's part of your genetic makeup and up-to-date conditioning. You know, I was a Royal Marine at one time. I was getting helicopters and go and shoot people. Mm-hmm. So what? That's just part of our destinies unfolding. And then he got very bad-tempered, and I said, look, I tell you what, I'm not enjoying this. Why don't we talk another time when we both feel like it? But, you know, I suppose my question to you is, your problem is you're addicted to thinking. How could it's not right, is it? It's not a truth, is it? I don't know what I'm asking you, Roger, but you know, just put me right here. That's just not helpful, is it?
Well, it can be and it can't be. I mean, so if we rephrase how we interpret what he said, it can be useful, and at the same time, from a different perspective, it can be not useful. Because if it sounds like you have to stop thinking, and we take that on as a prescription, and we're not destined to stop thinking, then that's going to become a expectation. I have to stop thinking. And then to the extent it doesn't happen, we're going to resist the fact that the thinking doesn't stop. So it can be a problem if we turn it into an insistence on life turning out that way. It's become an expectation if that's the case. If we look at it from the perspective that it's only the thinking mind that is the problem, and thinking of functional sorts is not problematic, then the statement that says you have to stop thinking is actually not completely accurate, because thinking doesn't stop in life. We're always going to need to have thought. It's part of our practical functioning in life. So from that point of view, you could say, well, if he meant all thinking has to stop, I would say that's not accurate. And then if we look at him, what he's saying is, I'm not saying that this is what you have to do, but it's just a description that thinking that happens of a certain type is our uncomfortableness, and it makes life seem like a problem. And if it stops, then there's a relief from the uncomfortable feeling of life. So he may have been saying it as a description of an uncomfortable thinking that happens, which may be, so you might not see it, he might see it, and you might not see it, but he might be wrong. So all of these things, we have to hold all of these things in a light way. And so if there is suffering thinking, then someone could say, the problem is you're addicted to thinking. Now that's really just a description, right, of thinking is always happening. And really what it's saying is thinking is the problem. Maybe seeing that will lead to a stopping of thinking. So basically there's about 4 different ways we can interpret what he said. Some of them are useful and some of them aren't useful. So I guess it comes back to you. What do you think about your thinking?
You said something, I've just recalled now, about an attachment to your thoughts or attachment to thoughts. And then later on you said you can drop out of that. You can drop out of that and into peacefulness. Just observe it. Don't invest in it, sort of thing.
Yes. And then afterwards I said none of these things are prescriptions of something that you have to make happen, but rather they're descriptions of what might happen. So when it says,
I think that's,
go on.
I think that's great. When you see, when you talk to me, when you were saying these are not prescriptions, they're just concepts that you might find helpful.
Yes.
Whereas it just seems to me, Roger, the realization is I've spent all my life with other people trying to regulate me. You need to do this, you don't need to do that. Stop doing this, start doing that. Stop laying around, start making some effort. As though I was always in the wrong. It's quite extreme. I was out and about yesterday. I was in this wonderful seaside town in a lovely cafe with the people who work there are fantastic. They're all volunteers. And I was surrounded by people who were complaining and finding fault with reality. They wanted things to be some other way. And it was almost a hell. It was almost a hell. Because I was quite happy sat there eating my cream tea and my cup of Earl Grey tea. I am dealing with the lovely people who work there. All right, they were fucking things up a bit or whatever, but they're volunteers and it's cheap in there and the quality is good. So for me, everything was okay. Sorry a bit, but it just seems to me that life or circumstances can be an absolute onslaught upon who I am, my authentic self as I am. It was quite a big realization, and your talk today just, I don't know, somehow brought all that stuff up. So I can't ever thank you enough, Roger, really.
Oh, you're very welcome, Martin. I enjoy sitting here. So it's nice that it's received.
You do practice what you preach. Not that you're you know what I mean? I don't mean that in the wrong. But no. This connected, this peace of mind in daily living, this happiness, you personify it, and as opposed to my former teacher, as I called him, who's just so irascible. He's just, I think you said it, let it be. If you can just let it all be, there are no problems. Doesn't matter what the circumstances are, doesn't matter what's happening, doesn't matter what you're feeling, doesn't matter what somebody else is saying or doing or feeling. If you could just let it be, then the circumstances at some stage will change. It's just... Anyway, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Martin. It's good that you got to get it off your chest.
Is that what it sounds like? Yeah, it's almost if you.
I don't know.
Also, sorry.
No, why not?
It was quite fun. I was stood at the counter and this woman came up, totally interrupted me. She said, I want my money back for my food. It's not arrived. My husband's drink and food arrived half an hour ago and I'm still waiting for mine. And they said, oh, I'm sorry, madam. And they went in the kitchen, they found it. And they said, oh, well, here it is. Sorry, they haven't brought it out to you. And she said, well, I just want my money back now. And it was just, I just thought, poor woman. She's on holiday. Anyway, I just thought, God, it's just insanity.
Yeah, we have a tendency to complain.
Yeah.
Anyhow, well...
Yeah, but everybody... Thank you, Roger. Yeah, complain, not letting things be, wanting to be some other way. Thank you.
Hello, Frank.
Hey, Roger, thanks. Oh, thank you, Martin. You had me laughing so loud. My God, that was so funny. Anyways, oh God, yeah. So I have a question about thoughts, Roger. And again, I want to thank you for these satsangs too. They've been so helpful to me. And I've been on here since I think you first started back in March. So
great. You're welcome.
I have a question about thoughts. I was thinking, this whole idea of doership and that, and it's very clear to me at this point that I do not go into the basement every morning to create my thoughts for the day. That's very clear. They just pop up. Mm-hmm. But on the other hand, I can also, like if somebody says to me, hey, Frank, think of a tree, or think of a house. I can make myself think of a house and think of a tree. So that got me thinking about the whole doership thing. It seems like there is some kind of doership there in that instance.
No,
what's your take on that? I'm sure there isn't, but this is how my mind's telling me right now.
I'm sure
there isn't. What's your take on that?
I'm sure there isn't as well. And your building of the scenario has the answer in it. The only reason you thought about a house is because they mentioned a house. So what you think is...
Somebody says to me, hey, Frank, think of a house. So I have to make myself think of a house, no? How is that?
They made you think of a house.
Could I just say, no, I don't want to think of a house? I guess I got to think about that.
Then they, that was... then you might say, well, I decided not to think about a house, but actually you decided not to think about a house only because they asked you to think about a house. And so you can see that whatever... So, if someone says, Frank, think about a house, you don't think about your ex-wife. Well, maybe you do, because maybe she's got the house. Today's comedy night. Sorry. So if someone says, Frank, think about a house, you don't think about ice cream. So the fact that you think about a house, which seems like it's, there is doership because I thought about a house. When we look at it, it's inspired by the question, which is the circumstance. So we find ourselves in a circumstance, and we react to the circumstance. So the circumstance in this example is someone asking you to think about a house, as opposed to think about an ice cream. And then thinking about a house happens, or your insistence on not thinking about a house happens. So if you think about it, it's worth looking at it, you'll see that what happens, which you think is your doing, is actually a result of the circumstance that came before. So there is this personal investigation. Ramesh said, if you really want a practice, then there's the practice he described as personal investigation of your own. And so he said, at the end of the day or at any time, sit quietly, turn off your phone. He said you can have a coffee or a beer or a sherry. You don't have to sit in any position. And take one event from the day. You say, all the others I'm not sure of, but this I'm sure was my doing. And then investigate it, and you'll find that that event that you are sure was your doing was a result of something that you saw, smelt, tasted, heard, or touched in the environment that you weren't in control of. You weren't in control of what you saw, what you heard, what you tasted, what you touched. And that input created a response in your body or a reaction in your body, which was, let's say, a subsequent thought. And then that subsequent thought, which is a result of something you saw, tasted, smelt, touched, or heard, that thought may lead to an action. And so when you trace the action that you're sure is your doing back, you see that it is a series of chain reactions based on factors you had no control over, based on the circumstance that you had no control over, and based on your genes and up-to-date conditioning that you had no control over. So in your example, when we do the personal investigation of your own, you see you weren't in control of the person being there, and you weren't in control of what question they asked you. And because they asked you a question, that question was heard, and then there is a response in your body. And that response may be a thought that says, okay, I'll think about a house. And then an image of, I don't know, a thatched house appears in your head. And we think, I thought about a thatched house. But actually, when we trace it back, we see it's a whole sequence of events that were out of your control.
Leaves this question in my mind about, this localization of whatever it is that we are in this body. Mm-hmm. So that thought the thought to have me think of a house came from the outside. It sort of landed somewhere in this area, right? And then the thought came up. So something still had that thought come up. Did I miss something here? And you probably just explained it, but I was kind of spacing out during part of it. So it has to land, and something has to say, okay, create this thought now, so bring up a house.
No, not at all.
That's still just...
It lands, lands, but nothing says create this thought. It's sort of like, when you throw the ball at the dunking machine at the fair, the ball hits the trigger or the lever, and it doesn't require some entity to say, okay, now drop the man. The ball hits the lever and the man drops. Just like the question says, the question comes in, think of a house, and it doesn't require someone to say, okay, now think of a house. There is just the input and then the output because of the causality, just like the ball hitting the lever and the man falling.
Response then, just like it's very it just makes you feel like there's absolutely no like we have no control over anything at all. It seems like
there's no one home. That's what there's no one here. Or when I say who did that, who thought about the house, right? You're saying I thought about the house. I had to think about the house. I had to agree to the question. And I'm like, this is the key of the who thought about the house. A body-mind organism designed to function a particular way functioned. There is no who. There is a body-mind organism designed to function in a particular way. So when a question comes in, it functions, and the output is the thought of a house. And we think there's a who that did it. And when we look at it, this is the insight of there's no one here. Everything is a happening. It's like, oh my God, I thought I did things. And we realize there is no who, there's just a biological instrument functioning.
That still has to land more deeply in me because I still struggle with it.
Yeah, but
can I give you a short story about? I'm inspired by what Martin said. I had something happen to me yesterday that I want to kind of bring into this if I can, if we have time.
Okay.
I called up a therapist yesterday that I had 15 years ago who really just went crazy on me during one of our sessions. He just went nuts, started throwing things around and everything. And I was on medication, so I needed this guy. And I ended up seeing him for another couple of years, and I thought to myself, and I never confronted him about his behavior. And I never told anybody either. So I decided to call him yesterday, and we got into a huge argument. He never apologized for what he did. He actually denied it. And so I said to myself, why did I do that? It just made me even more angry because I was expecting some kind of an apology. This is like 10 years ago, 15 years ago that this incident happened. So again, there's no doer there. There was just like something came over me and just made that call. And now I feel like I'm dealing with the effects of that, of the effects of having confronted somebody who went nuts on me and doesn't really, is somebody who's supposed to know better and isn't owning up to it and it didn't apologize or anything. Now I've got this anger inside me. So I'm dealing with that right now. But I don't know, I'm trying to fit all this into this whole idea of non-doership, but it's right now I'm just stuck with these feelings.
Yeah, it's hard when the feelings are there, because the feelings are saying, he did it. He shouldn't have done it this way. So once again, I understand when the feelings are there, it's it all gets clouded by the strong sense of doership. The same question is like, who denied or who started throwing things around? This who is very important. Like, who did it? And you'd say, well, he did it. The therapist did it. I say, who did it? And because we're so convinced of our own who-ness, if I get angry, I did it as me, the who, the doer. And so then if someone else throws things around, it was him, the who. And I'm saying, who is he? He is just a machine, genes and up-to-date conditioning. He couldn't have done it any other way. And then yesterday you confronted him, and the response was the response you got. And we're saying, well, he shouldn't have done it that way. He should have, well, I understand it's not ideal in terms of preference. It would have been much better from a preference point of view if he says, yes, I think about it from time to time. It was an overreaction and I'm sorry it happened. That would have been much more pleasurable, not denying that. But now the fact is it turned out this way, that's pain in the moment. And the question is, who delivered the pain? There isn't a who if we understand the concepts here of non-doership. It's saying there is simply God's will unfolding. There is a biological instrument responding to the circumstance. So the circumstance was you calling up and reminding him, and the response was what you got. Now, if we put a who in there, which is the doer, then, we need them to have done it differently.
That, because I know that's where the answer lies, but I'm just not there right now. It's not sinking in.
Yeah, so you might go and get
at this point.
really angry, without any inhibition, just in a room on your own, and say all the things you feel like saying without thinking about non-doership or any of that. Like, treat him as a doer, right? As a who shouldn't have done it, and just get angry and say all the things that you'd like to say. Get it off your chest. Not at him, because that doesn't serve much of a purpose, just in a room so that you can really voice what you're feeling. And that would be very useful.
Thanks, Raja. Yeah, because my I have this desire in me to call him again and go through this all again, because I feel like, oh, he got me, because he hung up on me, and I was like, oh, and I had that feeling about, guy got me again, and it's like this part of me that just wants to keep going back in and fight, going back in, go back in, and I know that's not what the answer is, because he's not going to ever apologize or own up to it. So, but yeah, that's helpful. That's helpful. Thanks, Raj. I don't want to turn this into a big therapy session, but thanks, I appreciate it.
You're welcome.
Thanks.
We'll take 2 more questions. I'll try and answer them quickly. Who is it? Sorry. Hello, Sorrow.
Hey.
Hi.
It is an absolute pleasure. I really don't know how to thank you. You've been great. Like, I've been listening to all of your videos on YouTube, and this is the first time I actually joined. Every time I joined, it was afterwards. There were only 2 people there, so I didn't know what happened. But anyways, I just wanted to thank you. You've been great.
You're welcome.
I've been listening to everyone, like Muji, Eckhart, Rupert, everyone. Paul Hederman, that was something else too. It was very nice. And yours is just amazing. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
I just want to ask, one question is that when it all is very clear, I'm not the doer, there is no one here who is doing things, it's all just happening. There is a thought that if this is, not if, I know it is, but shouldn't the biological preference also goes away? Like, isn't, I think that somehow that also doesn't play a role as much. Like, your preferences are going away too. Isn't that the case?
Well, if that happened, you'd just as likely enjoy a handful of soil from the garden instead of a nice, fresh salad. So when we look at it that way, we go, oh, it doesn't make sense for the preferences to go away. What goes away is our attachment to the preference being delivered. And when our insistence on our preference being delivered falls away, what we find is that we are indifferent on one level. Attitudinally, we're indifferent to what happens in the flow of life. But indifferent doesn't mean that we don't feel a difference between hot water in the shower and cold water in the shower. It doesn't mean that we don't notice the difference between food that is good versus food that has gone bad. And so clearly we'd say, look, pick anyone, pick the Buddha or whoever you feel is the epitome or the epitome of enlightenment, and think, did they have biological preferences? Would they like to eat fresh food or stale food? Now, they wouldn't complain about the stale food. If that's all there was, they would know, well, at least I can be grateful that there is some food, even if it's stale. But experientially in their body, they know that it doesn't taste as good as fresh food. So this question of preferences is it's biological. So we are always going to have preferences. The suffering is attitudinal, where we insist that our preference is delivered. And that falls away. And so then there is a much more go with the flow sort of attitude, but knowing when your preference isn't delivered, but you go with the flow anyway.
Itself is also a happening. It's not me choosing a hot shower versus cold, or
the preference is definitely it's part of your system, so there's no choice in it. We don't know what our preferences are. We might know what our tendency usually is, but the fact is that your preference is always fresh in each moment. So you might say, oh, I have a preference for, salads. But there are some days when you don't feel like a salad. Let's say you've just eaten a whole lot of food. Then in that moment, your preference isn't for a salad. You might say, oh, the last thing I want is more food. And your preference for sleep is there when you are tired, but it's not there when you're not tired. And the truth is we don't know what our preference is going to be in the next moment, because it's a result of our system being exactly what it is. So if we think we know our preferences, we're making a mistake. We only know our preference in the moment, and it's not a choice, it's a happening.
What I wanted to hear. Thank you so much. So it depends in the moment, because every moment it's just a different happening, and we are not, like what I'm saying with preferences is that we have a list of idea that this is who I am, and I like this and I don't like that, and that goes away. And then something comes and you say, oh, I usually have tea instead of coffee, but I wanted coffee right now. So you just look at it and say, that's different. Like it is happening. You come to see it more obvious. At the end, is it just the one? Because sometimes it is for me, like you see no one is, well, not sometimes, nowadays it's all the time. You just see life, like as you said, and thank you, like you told us how to do it, like lower your, like look at everything the way you explained, and it's just wonderful. It helps. Like sometimes at the beginning I said, what, I should really try this, and I did, and it worked, and thank you. So I see life attached to what is seeing it. You know what I mean? Is it always going to be like this? Or sometimes, well, I do see it. Sometimes I do go back to the person, to the individual. And of course, in the daily life, I have to do my work and all that. But in the background, it is always there. However, they are saying that it will be in the front and not background, and it is always going to be that. Can you just talk about that a little?
The experience, you mean, of witnessing and being impersonal, feeling very impersonal and detached?
Yes, that's it. Like sometimes you're witnessing from a background. That's everything is happening, and yes, Zora just answered like this, like I see myself a little bit detached, but then the experience of seeing it all like one, attached together, the witness and the happening are just as one. That happens too, where I'm not in the background watching everything happening. Mm-hmm. So I just want to know if that's always going to be like that, or what's your opinion about it?
I think that a lot of these shifts in perspective and shifts in the qualitative nature of the experience, where the sense of what is watching or what we are changes, they're different states of that are available in life. And it's not that there is so often in Advaita and the top-down teachings, the witnessing is said to be not a state. It is the absence of states. It is the direct, it is freedom from states. The reason that's said is because resting in that place, which is the equivalent of allowing everything, or just being with what is, where there is no labeling. So the psychological me has fallen away, and then there is a oneness with what is. And so the separation that is created by the psychological me being there, which is not really a separation, it's just, it creates the experience of separation. When because the psychological me is just the arising of another layer in the overall experience. It's the arising of a layer or an object of thought. But that object has a great power on changing the qualitative nature of what is felt. So it creates this sense of me and the rest of the world, simply because of the thinking. And it doesn't feel like it's because of thinking. It feels like, well, that's reality. Whereas actually it's reality as created with the presence of that thinking, that psychological me. And when that psychological me falls away, which is what the beginning of this satsang was about, then the qualitative nature of life changes, because that me thought, which is consistently there until it's not, that me thought has a very specific power on how the experience is created. And when it falls away, there is a new freedom that's found. And so the non-dual teachings focus on that, because it's a significant shift. So today's satsang was about talking about seeing that there is this layer of thinking that is always commenting on life and how that can fall away. And so for some teachings, that's the job that they focus on, just that. And they do it by taking the methodology of saying what you are is the witness. You are not the body, you are not the thinking, you are the formless awareness in which everything arises. And the more we hear that, for some people it's their destiny to hear it, and that's the message, that's what it's all about. And there is more and more of the witnessing from that perspective that happens. And that resting as that is powerful, because it strengthens our capacity to rest outside of thinking. And while we're resting outside of thinking, it may even be diminishing and weakening that that movement of thought. But I don't think that, or my experience is that is not at all the ultimate liberated perspective. It's a sort of it's a halfway house where we are strengthening a certain muscle, if we use an analogy, which is the muscle of witnessing and allowing everything to be as it is, which is the opposite of the other muscle that has been strengthened throughout our life, which is always commenting about how life should be and how it shouldn't be. And so it's very important to weaken that old habit and strengthen the alternative. Once that's happened sufficiently, then to me there's a movement that happens once we realize actually we have to live life as the human. We're meant to live life as the human. So even if life is seen to be a dream or an experience, in the end it's about it being an experience of being human. At first we think, oh no, the problem is that when it's an experience of being human, that's suffering, and we need to realize that we are not the person, or we're not human, we are formless awareness. But I would say that's only valid in the first half of the journey. The second half of the journey is to realize, oh, life was always meant to be, and always is meant to be lived as the human being, but it can be lived as the ignorant or confused human being, or the human being that sees things more clearly, not because it's a personal achievement, just because of the progression through life, the movement that life has brought about. And that's where the Zen saying comes in, before liberation, mountains and rivers were seen as real. During the process of liberation, mountains and rivers were seen as unreal. That's the phase where we are witnessing life from the perspective of formless awareness, and from that point of view everything is seen as just an appearance in consciousness, and therefore the mountains and rivers are seen to be unreal. And then after liberation, where we are chop wood and carry water again, mountains and rivers are seen as real again. And the typical non-dual teachings are focusing on moving someone from mountains and rivers are real to mountains and rivers are not real. And it only describes, ignorance and truth. And so truth is seeing mountains and rivers are not real. But when you get the fuller picture of the process, where they then say, and after mountains and rivers are seen to be unreal, they're then seen to be real again. Then it says, so this witnessing is not the ultimate standpoint. It too morphs into something else. Pardon me. However, it is we have to go through the process. The process is a process of change, and so the witnessing can be a very important part of that process.
Thank you so much. Thank you again.
You're welcome. Okay, I think that will be it for tonight. Thank you for joining.